Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive, this time all about mental health. We've got some really interesting research here about how our brains work, all the little signs that things might be off-kilter, and what we can actually do to take care of this incredible organ that pretty much runs the show.
Yeah, one of the things that really stood out to me in this research was how it describes the brain like an orchestra.
Oh, I like that. An orchestra.
Mm.
So if our brains are like orchestras, what happens when things start to, feel a little off?
Well, just like an orchestra needs every instrument to be in tune and, playing its part, our mental well-being relies on this really delicate balance of brain chemicals and neural pathways. And even these slight imbalances can impact how we think, how we feel, and even how we behave.
So it's like all interconnected.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
It is.
So let's talk about anxiety then. What's actually going on in this brain orchestra when someone's feeling anxious? Is it just, a matter of thinking more positive thoughts, or is there something more to it?
It's actually way more complex than just positive thinking. Anxiety actually involves physical changes in the brain, particularly in a region called the amygdala.
Okay, the amygdala. And what does that do?
So you can think of the amygdala as the brain's alarm system.
Okay, got it.
So when we experience anxiety, this alarm system goes into overdrive, and it's constantly sounding the alarm even when there's no real danger present.
So it's like that smoke detector going off when you just burnt toast.
Exactly.
There's no fire, but there's a whole lot of noise and stress.
A perfect analogy.
Okay.
And so this overactive amygdala then sends out a flood of stress hormones throughout the body.
Yeah.
And that leads to all those familiar feelings of unease, worry, and even panic.
Wow, okay. That makes a lot of sense. The research also talks about depression, which seems even more complex. What's happening in the brain when someone is dealing with depression?
Yeah, depression is really complex. It affects the brain on a structural level, causing changes in areas like the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex.
Okay, so 2 areas now.
2 key areas, and they're pretty crucial for our everyday functioning.
Yeah, definitely. So the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. Remind me what those do again.
Right. So the hippocampus is vital for learning and memory, and the prefrontal cortex that governs our decision-making and our emotional regulation.
So are those parts of the brain essentially offline when someone's experiencing depression?
They're not totally offline, but they are impacted in a way that makes those, positive thoughts and feelings a lot harder to access. It's like imagine trying to learn a new song when your instrument is out of tune. It just becomes much more difficult.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. It really paints a picture of how much of a struggle it is, and it makes it clear that these are not just feelings, they're tangible changes happening in the brain. Okay, so we've talked about anxiety, we've talked about depression. What about stress? Now everyone deals with stress at some point, but when does it actually become a problem for our mental health?
That's a great question, and the research makes a really important distinction between short-term stress and chronic stress.
Okay, so 2 types of stress.
Yeah, so short-term stress, like the kind you feel before a big presentation or, a deadline, that can actually be beneficial. It helps us to focus and perform under pressure.
Oh, that's interesting. So a little bit of stress can actually be a good thing.
It can in those short bursts, but chronic stress, that's the kind that just lingers day in and day out. That's where the real trouble starts.
Okay, so what's the difference then in terms of what's happening in our brains with those 2 types of stress?
The key difference really lies in the hormone cortisol.
Cortisol, okay.
When we're stressed, our bodies release cortisol. And those short bursts of cortisol can be helpful. But when we're chronically stressed, our bodies are just flooded with it. And over time, this can actually damage brain cells, particularly in the hippocampus.
Oh, no. So if the hippocampus is crucial for memory, does this mean that chronic stress can actually make us more forgetful?
Yes, exactly. Chronic stress can negatively impact the size and the function of the hippocampus, leading to problems with concentration, decision-making, and even emotional regulation.
Wow, so it's not just about feeling stressed, it's actually impacting how our brains work.
It is. And not only that, it affects the entire body as well.
Really? Okay, so tell me more. What else can chronic stress do?
Well, high levels of cortisol have been linked to an increased risk of heart disease, a weakened immune system, and it can even speed up aging at the cellular level.
Whoa, seriously?
Yeah, by wearing down telomeres, which are these protective caps on the ends of our DNA.
So to use that orchestra analogy again, is it like chronic stress is making the whole orchestra fall apart? The instruments are breaking, the music's getting all chaotic?
That is a very vivid way to put it.
Oh.
And this brings us to a really important point about our mental health. While our genes and our environment play a role, our lifestyle choices have a surprisingly large impact as well.
So it's not just about what we're born with, but it's also about how we take care of ourselves and how we manage that stress.
Exactly. It's like the nature versus nurture debate. but with our daily habits playing this huge role.
Okay, so our habits matter.
They do. And the research actually calls this a lifestyle feedback loop, emphasizing that diet, sleep, and exercise aren't just trendy buzzwords. They're crucial maintenance routines for a healthy brain.
So what we eat, how much we sleep, all of that can actually affect our brain's performance. How does that work?
Well, the brain is a very energy-demanding organ. It consumes about 20% of our body's total energy, so needs the right fuel to function properly.
So what's the brain food we should be reaching for, and what should we avoid if we want to keep our brains healthy?
Our brains thrive on things like omega-3 fatty acids, which are found in oily fish nuts and seeds. Antioxidants found in colorful fruits and vegetables are also crucial because they protect the brain from damage.
Okay, so healthy fats, good colorful fruits and veggies, also good.
Exactly. Now, on the other hand, things like processed foods, sugary drinks, and excessive amounts of unhealthy fats can actually trigger inflammation in the brain.
So those unhealthy foods aren't just bad for our waistlines, they're messing with our brains too.
That's right. And then there's sleep.
Sleep, oh, so important.
It is. During sleep, our brains are incredibly busy clearing out toxins, consolidating memories, and preparing for the next day.
It's like the brain's overnight cleaning crew.
Exactly.
So what happens when we don't get enough sleep? Does the brain just, skip its cleaning routine?
Pretty much chronic sleep deprivation disrupts this essential cleaning process, increasing our risk of developing anxiety, depression, and even Alzheimer's disease later in life.
Okay, I'm definitely rethinking those late-night Netflix binges now.
Good. And finally, we can't forget about exercise.
Oh, yes, exercise, of course.
It's like a miracle drug for the brain.
Yes.
And one of the best things we can do for our mental health.
I'm always up for hearing more about the benefits of exercise. What happens in the brain when we exercise?
Well, physical activity increases blood flow, which delivers oxygen and nutrients to those brain cells. It also releases endorphins, which are those feel-good chemicals that boost our mood and reduce pain.
Yeah, everyone loves endorphins.
Right. And maybe most importantly, it stimulates the production of BDNF.
BDNF. Now, that's not one I've heard of before. What is that?
BDNF is a protein that acts like fertilizer for the brain.
Okay, so it helps our brains grow.
It does. Think of it like miracle grow for your brain.
I like that analogy.
It helps neurons to grow, and it strengthens the connections between them.
So it's essentially making our brains stronger and more resilient.
Exactly.
So we actually have a lot more control over our mental well-being than we might think.
We absolutely do. The choices we make every day, from what we eat to how much we move our bodies, all contribute to creating a healthy or an unhealthy environment for our brains.
This is all so empowering to hear, but you did mention earlier that there's a tricky feedback loop at play here too. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so if we're already struggling with our mental health, it can be harder to make those healthy choices.
Yeah.
We kind of get trapped in a cycle where poor mental health makes self-care harder, which then further worsens our mental health.
So how do we break free from that cycle? And how do we even know if our brains, need a tune-up, so to speak?
The first step is really self-awareness. And this research we're looking at today actually includes some really insightful questions to help us check in with our mental well-being.
Okay, so like a self-assessment.
Exactly. And these aren't intended for diagnosis, but they can help us to spot some potential warning signs.
So what kind of questions are we talking about? What are some signs that our brains might be sending us an SOS?
One of the key questions is, are you still feeling joy and fulfillment in things that used to excite you?
Okay, so if you're not feeling that joy anymore, that could be a sign.
It could be. If you're finding yourself feeling apathetic or numb towards activities you once enjoyed, it could be a sign that something's a bit off.
It's like losing your zest for life, like someone just dimmed the lights on your enjoyment.
Exactly.
Okay.
Another important question is, are you feeling overwhelmed by tasks that used to feel manageable?
Okay, so like everyday things that used to be easy now feel really hard.
Right. If you're constantly feeling stressed, anxious, or like you're just drowning in responsibilities, that could be a sign that your stress response system is stuck in overdrive.
So we're looking for changes not just in our moods, but also in our ability to handle things that used to be easy.
Exactly. And of course, there are also the more obvious signs like persistent sadness, irritability, changes in sleep patterns, or difficulty concentrating.
So our brains are basically waving these little red flags trying to get our attention.
They are. And the research emphasizes that simply recognizing the need for change is a really powerful first step.
So it's not about blaming yourself, but just acknowledging that you might need some extra support.
Right. It's about acknowledging your struggles and being open to seeking help and support.
This is all such valuable information. I feel like we're really getting a good understanding of how our brains work, how they can get out of balance, and how our everyday choices factor into all of this. Now I'm curious to know, what can we actually do to rewire our brains to restore that sense of balance and well-being?
Well, that's where things get really exciting because our brains have this incredible ability to change and adapt throughout our lives, a phenomenon called neuroplasticity and
Welcome back. So before we took that little pause, we were talking about how our everyday choices really create this feedback loop that can either support or sabotage our mental well-being. Now let's get to the really exciting part, rewiring our brains for the better.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
It's incredible to think that our brains can actually change and adapt throughout our lives. So how do we tap into that power and start shifting those ingrained patterns?
That's where neuroplasticity comes in. It's the brain's remarkable ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life.
So it's not like our brains are just fixed and set in stone.
Not at all. Your brain is constantly adapting based on your experiences.
So it's like our brains are being sculpted and reshaped by everything we do and think.
Exactly. And the best part is that we're not just passive bystanders in this process. We can actively participate in shaping our brains by consciously choosing experiences that lead to positive changes. So we have more control than we realize. We can choose to upgrade our brains, so to speak. What are some of the most effective ways to do that?
There are so many amazing tools available to us, all backed by science. One of the most powerful is therapy, particularly a type called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
I've heard CBT. It's all about challenging those negative thought patterns, right? But how does that actually rewire the brain?
CBT helps us identify and challenge those distorted, unhelpful thoughts that often fuel anxiety and depression. It's like we're shining a light on those thoughts and saying, wait a minute, is this really true? Is this even helpful?
Yeah.
And then we work on replacing those negative thoughts with more balanced and realistic ones.
So it's not just about positive thinking, it's about being more realistic and questioning those negative assumptions that we often have. Does this actually lead to physical changes in the brain?
It does. Studies have shown that CBT can actually shrink the amygdala, that fear center we talked about earlier, making it less reactive over time.
So we're turning down the volume on that overreactive alarm system.
Exactly. And what about medication? What role does that play in rewiring?
Yeah, I was wondering about that too.
Medication can be another valuable tool, but it's important to remember that it's not a quick fix, and it's not for everyone. For some people, medication can be a real game changer. It works by targeting those chemical messengers in the brain called neurotransmitters that play a key role in mood motivation and other cognitive functions.
So it's like medication helps restore balance to the brain's chemistry, giving it a better foundation for healing and growth.
Exactly. For example, antidepressants often work by increasing levels of serotonin, a neurotransmitter that's closely tied to mood regulation, sleep, and even appetite.
I've also heard a lot about mindfulness and meditation these days. What's the science behind those practices and how do they fit into this rewiring process?
Mindfulness and meditation are incredibly powerful tools for rewiring the brain. They work by strengthening the prefrontal cortex, which is like the CEO of the brain.
The CEO. Okay, I like that analogy.
It's responsible for all those executive functions like planning, decision-making, emotional regulation, and impulse control.
So mindfulness is like giving our brain's CEO a crash course in leadership skills.
Exactly. And studies have shown that mindfulness practice can actually increase the density of gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, which means more neurons and better communication between brain cells.
So more gray matter equals a stronger, more capable brain.
You got it. And this translates to better executive function, better emotional regulation, and a greater ability to handle stress. Mindfulness also has a calming effect on the amygdala, helping us to observe our thoughts and feelings without getting swept away by them.
It's like we're training our brains to be less reactive to stress and anxiety. I'm sensing a theme here. A lot of these tools seem to work by calming down that overactive amygdala.
You're absolutely right. And the benefits of mindfulness go even further, improving focus, boosting creativity, and even enhancing our relationships with others.
Okay, I'm definitely adding mindfulness to my brain-boosting toolbox. Earlier, we talked about exercise as being beneficial too. How does exercise contribute to rewiring?
Exercise is like a magic elixir for the brain. Remember we talked about BDNF being like miracle grow for brain cells? Well, exercise is one of the best ways to boost BDNF levels. And aerobic exercise in particular has been shown to be incredibly beneficial for brain health.
So if I want to fertilize my brain and help it grow, I need to get moving.
Exactly. And there's one more essential ingredient for brain health that we haven't discussed yet: social connection.
Social connection? I wouldn't have thought of socializing as a brain-boosting activity. How does that work?
Humans are incredibly social creatures. We're wired for connection. When we connect with others, our brains release oxytocin, a hormone that has calming effects, reduces stress, and enhances those feelings of trust and belonging.
So having close relationships and spending time with loved ones can actually benefit our brains.
Absolutely. It's not just about having fun. It's about giving our brains a dose of those feel-good chemicals that help us to thrive. Studies have shown that people with strong social connections tend to have better cognitive function, lower rates of depression, and they even live longer.
Wow, I'm realizing that taking care of our mental health is about so much more than just therapy or medication. It's about creating a whole lifestyle that supports our brains in every way possible.
That's a great way to put it. It's about a holistic approach that combines all of these amazing tools to create a brain-healthy environment.
This can all feel a bit overwhelming. Where do we even begin?
The good news is that even small changes can have a significant impact. You don't have to overhaul your entire life overnight. Start by incorporating small, manageable steps into your routine.
What are some examples of small steps we can take to start rewiring our brains today?
Something as simple as a 20-minute walk in nature can work wonders for your mood and cognitive function.
I can definitely fit that into my schedule. What else?
Starting a gratitude practice is another great one. Take a few minutes each day to just write down a few things you're grateful for. It sounds simple, but it can really shift your focus to the positive and start rewiring your brain for happiness.
I love that idea of gratitude being a brain training tool. What about laughter? Is that actually good for our brains?
Absolutely. Laughter triggers the release of endorphins and dopamine, those feel-good chemicals that boost our mood and help us manage stress.
So watching a funny movie or spending time with people who make me laugh is actually a form of self-care.
That's right. And don't underestimate the power of simply connecting with loved ones, having meaningful conversations, and nurturing those social bonds. It all contributes to a healthier, happier brain.
This is all so inspiring. It sounds like we really can rewire our brains for greater happiness and resilience. But I have a question. Is there a point where we've rewired enough where we can sort of coast on those positive changes? Or is this an ongoing process?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
And it brings us to a really important concept, the brain's dynamic nature. Even when we've made significant progress, our brains are still constantly adapting to our experiences. It's like that orchestra analogy. We need to keep tuning those instruments and keep practicing if we want the music to stay harmonious.
So it's not about reaching a finish line, but about embracing the journey of continuous growth and self-discovery.
Exactly. And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore this idea of the brain's dynamic nature in more depth. We'll also uncover some surprising insights about how consciously choosing joy and positive experiences can be a form of mental training in itself.
Welcome back. It's been so fascinating to unpack how our brains work. You know, how they can get a little out of tune and all the amazing ways we can actually rewire them for better well-being.
It really is remarkable, isn't it? All the power we have.
Yeah. And before the break, you mentioned something that I wanted to circle back to. You talked about this idea of, consciously choosing joy and positive experiences as a form of mental training. Can we really train our brains to be happier?
It might sound a bit too good to be true, but there's more and more evidence coming out all the time suggesting that actively seeking out those positive experiences can have a real impact on our brains and how we experience the world.
So it's not just about, getting rid of stress and negativity. It's about really cultivating joy, happiness, even a sense of purpose.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just, thinking happy thoughts.
Yeah.
It's about making those conscious choices to engage in activities that bring us real joy. Spending time with people who uplift us. Nurturing our passions, finding ways to contribute to something bigger than ourselves.
So it's like a more proactive approach to mental health.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Shifting from that mindset of, fixing what's broken to one of cultivating what thrives.
I like that.
And the amazing thing is that when we engage in these positive experiences, our brains respond in really incredible ways.
So what's actually happening in the brain when we're, experiencing joy or doing something that gives us that sense of purpose?
Our brains release a whole cascade of feel-good chemicals like dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin.
Oh, the good stuff.
And these chemicals not only make us feel good in the moment, but they also actually nourish our brains. They strengthen those neural pathways associated with happiness, resilience, and overall well-being.
So we're rewiring our brains for happiness from the inside out.
Exactly.
That's incredible. So is this something that takes a lot of effort? How can we actually incorporate this idea of joy training into our everyday lives?
Well, the beauty of it is that joy and positivity can be found in even the simplest things. It's about cultivating an attitude of appreciation for all the good things in your life, no matter how small they may seem.
I love that.
Take a moment to savor that first cup of coffee in the morning. Listen to your favorite music. Spend time in nature. Have a good laugh with a friend. All of these seemingly small moments can add up to big changes in your brain and how you experience the world.
It's about being more mindful
It is.
and really savoring those little moments of joy that we so often take for granted.
Exactly. And it's not about forcing yourself to be happy all the time. It's just about noticing and appreciating those good things when they happen.
And remembering that this is an ongoing process, right?
It is. Our brains are constantly changing and adapting, so it's important to make those positive choices a regular part of our lives. Just like we need to keep practicing to maintain our physical fitness, we need to keep practicing joy to maintain our mental fitness.
I love that analogy. So, well, this entire deep dive has been so insightful. We've explored so much about how our brains work, the challenges we face, and all the incredible tools that we have to create positive change.
It all comes back to that idea that you have more power than you realize to shape your own mental well-being.
And that's an important message for everyone listening. Mental health is a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs along the way, but you have the tools and the strength to navigate those challenges and create a life that is truly fulfilling and joyful. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into mental health. We'll see you next time.